everyone.
Morning.
Morning. My name's Shane Whittington. I'm the country manager for Modulus here in the UK. I'd like to welcome you all. And third day for us. It's been 2 tough days, and from my voice you can probably hear 2 tough evenings. And so I'm going to do my best Barry White impression while I announce the. I'd just like to again welcome you here. Please feel free at the end to stay with us and come and have a little look at Modulus. It'll be a real pleasure to see you. Today we have Subhati Guha, correct? From Zaha Hadid Architects, who's going to come and talk to us today about an architecture that brings people together. Really interesting topic, and I'm sure we'll have some really testing questions for him at the end. I think he's ready for them. So just welcome him and hand you over to him.
Thank you, Shane. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. The title of the topic is Enriching Environments, and I've split it up into 3 parts. So the first part is going to be a little bit of philosophy. The second part is going to be about the work. So I'll show a bit of details of the work. And the third part, if we have time, and if you're not slept already, we'll go into city planning a little bit, touch that topic. Okay, so does architecture really bring people together? So we'll try and explore that in the presentation. Let's see. Some of the questions we ask is this: is creativity purely a human construct? The question, why do we really build? Is it just function? And how many of you think it's function? Nobody? No answer? Okay, so it's a good start already. So we try and explore that, and we start from, let's say, the evolution of life forms. So when we grow from, the initial, let's say, Luca, which is the universal common ancestor of all species, they predominantly started with finding innovative solutions to find food, shelter, or avoid themselves from a predator. But that process kind of imbibed into everyone's DNA. So the process to seek a change, to find new solutions, is part of the DNA of every species, and that's one of the arguments I make. And that, in Darwin's philosophy, is the idea or the drive for the need necessarily was superseded by the drive for finding new ways, whether you needed food or not. So it became part of our DNA. So therefore, but how did it happen? Like, does it mean that we follow the principle that genetically we changed and therefore we are different? Or because Darwin was looking at larger spectrums of millenniums of timeline, that actually it is the creativity of small individuals over a large period of time that changed evolution. So that's what my argument is. That's why the fish moving the opposite direction is so important for a species, because if they don't do that, that species is figured out very quickly by other species and gets eaten away. So the DNA of aspiration, as I said, is in every species. So you look at a bird's nest, they're all different. They're always changing. They're never repeating, even though trying to use similar materials. So is typology of human plants, Durant's plants. We are always changing plants. But we could have done it in a way the birds do, which is being very sustainable, materials from the earth and consumed by the earth within a period of lifetime, but we don't do that. We seek for permanence. Why? So we'll come to that, but the initial starting point of at least Greek architecture was kind of a copy of the architecture in wood. So this idea of column capitals and so on was actually a way to translate temporary architecture into permanence. And therefore, you can see that in most of them, because stone doesn't really need to do this, but it did this because it was not just articulation, but it was to kind of reinterpret or reconstruct a permanent model. So why do we need permanence in architecture? So when we look at nature, these are two mountains. One is the Mount Everest, and the other one is in the Swiss Alps. And you couldn't possibly tell the difference. So nature, with all its beauty, does not give identity. But we do that. We want to build these identities to find new aspirations, not to copy them. So what are the influences of architecture in our society? Obviously, it gives an order that nature doesn't provide. It creates a presence of time. So every time we do something, it creates our new identity. And third, that identity that we build in 300, 500, 700 years go on to become the culture of the place, right? So culture is not looking backwards, it's looking forwards. So, however, human growth is non-linear. On the left is the curved walls in Luxor, and on the right is Dieste's walls. And you can see the relationship, but they're 3,000 years apart. There was no exploration on this subject for 3,000 years. So we are often known to go backwards very often. So I'll go now to design. So we leave it at that. And actually, I never really liked architecture. I never thought it was interesting because the definitions were very boring. To find some function, supervised construction, really, really boring. I mean, what I was really interested in was art. I liked painting, and that's how I started. And I thought, could there be a bigger canvas? And that's how architecture happened. But I thought I was a genius at 13. But actually, a lot of people had done it. You know, there's Schotter, you know, there's with influences of Mondrian and the Dessau movement. There was Corbusier, and kind of very much had influences of, you know, Picasso and that Cubism movement. Then obviously, when I graduated, I joined an architect called Charles Correa, who was also doing the same kind of work, kind of bringing on local cultures into the work with paintings and so on. So this is the kind of trajectory till I landed up at Zaha Hadid, which was also at the time looking into constructivist movement, reviving the Russian constructivist movement and so on. So which leads to a lot of generative, using art as a process to kind of form buildings and spaces. Obviously, this has been common. Usually, this was used in terms of articulations in olden structures and so on. So they were articulating the functional elements of art. So what is the deviation is that just windows and doors started getting more and more ornamented. Then there was the other hypothesis, which was doing the performative. So they took the geometry and the structure, and that became the articulation. However, you know, this is a good example where, you know, the pure dome is defined by the function or the structural integrity by its central keystone. However, these two domes are about 100, 200 meters apart. One is in the Vatican and one is in Pantheon. And in the Pantheon, you remove the keystone. And why? You know, why would you break the integrity of structure? But then why not? You know, that gives you a completely different space. So this idea to search a new window, as I call it, is what makes us travel, what makes us go and see these objects, spending the money that we earn and so on. So today, we're going to look at few subjects. I'll show you some projects of offices, public realm, stations, airports, arenas, all of the projects I've worked on. And then if you have time, as I said, we'll touch a little bit about the urban drag and the urban context. Workplaces. So all of you possibly work in a lot of workplaces. The evolution of workspace was very interesting because earlier work and home were the same space in the medieval times. So people worked in the same space they lived, right? It changed. However, the Johnson Rax Museum and so on, where office was a separate element, a separate place to go to, came into our lives. And why was that? Is that, where office and home were together, we had to then move towards something as a workflow, or the industrial, call it revolution, that streamlined the way work was done. So you had to work like machines. So they had to be together. And that split the jobs into two parts. The one is the blue collar, and as we know, is the white collar. However, the white collar then went on to occupy the offices, and then the plan form of these offices became a complete open plan. So as you see in the Mies van der Rohe building here. And obviously now we are talking about Google, Facebook, where you have kind of mixed use offices, but again, open plan. But I'm not a big fan of this because it brings too much anonymity. It has really little relationship building. So 3 critiques of mine is that closed spaces, or permanent desks makes you want to know the person next to you, right? Second is you can be yourself. You may not have a great day today, but you can still be yourself. In an open plan, you have to maintain a decorum, yeah? And therefore the need of larger HR and so on, right? And therefore, once you're free, you have more free exchange of knowledge. If you have to follow decorums, your imagination is kind of limited. That's my argument. I'm going to show a quick project where we try to interfere with these functions. So this is the factory connection in Leipzig, BMW. This was done before I joined the office. But here you see there's a multiplicity of 2 layers. One is the factory belts that run over the building. And the second is the desk spaces, and they are kind of interlocked with each other. They kind of merge. This was done in early 2000. It was finished in early 2000. But here you can see that in reality, how this influences the workflows. This is the canteen where everybody sits together. Doesn't matter if you're blue or white and so on. And that's the building. I'm not going to go too much into design in this, but this is a slide. It's my pure imagination in a way. It has no real evidence, but the only evidence I have is that the BMW, after the project was finished in 2005, their shares skyrocketed. They literally ruled out the entire car industry in the UK. Either they bought it out or they just took over. If you went to their factory, you could see they even focused on how the noise of the door slams down. So they had taken them to the next level. Now, I'll show you an office space that I designed in Milan. This is Torre Hadid. We were 3 architects, Hadid, Libeskind, and Isozaki, the 3 towers, and then we had 3 projects. These were the first buildings in Milan that were high-rise. And it was located from the Milan Cathedral in the other end. So there was an axis that ran through the site from the top. And we took that axis, and it reaches the base of the tower. And then we kind of twist that axis so that it fades into the sky. That was an initial, let's say, idea. Obviously, the tower is not straight. It's twisting in its form in the shape, but it's also increasing itself as it goes up to do the correction that you would have often seen in Greek architecture, to do the vertical correction. So that's how the tower was generated. I'll keep talking while this video is playing, but if it does play, okay. So, so this is how the tower is generated with 2 curves. We plot everything on the graph. All the curves and the flow plates are derived from 4 to 6 curves. And so we automatized this process to make it quicker, to adjust. There were about 9 to 10 iterations of the tower with more variation in every iteration. So there's a huge amount. Each glass panels was subdivided in a way that it could be efficient, cutting down. So it's not a very expensive tower, to be honest. And you can see how the drivers, so every floor, because it's different lengths, have to be subdivided differently. But it was all automatized with a script at those days, and Rhino script. And you can see a lot of numbers you'll start to see that's floating around. It did not we did not have to do much with it because we had already set the basic rule. And once the basic rules are set up, you can then automatize this. Obviously, we have the industry to deal with, the glass manufacturers, and so on, which we could then put back into the system so that we can adapt to that tolerance. So I would say it was the first kind of parametrically driven tower we had done to use it to be more efficient, right, to make it happen. Obviously, it's built with two skins. So this is the first skin, which seals the fire, which is a double glazed. And then we have the central area. This is where the core comes out. So the core is straight, but the areas around the core rotate with the tower. So every time you come out of the core, you're always looking through that slim opening out into the city. And this is the outer facade of the glass. So now, which is a single layered glass. And we know that glass can be pushed a little bit to bend. So therefore, we could bend the fourth point to a certain degree. And that was also scripted in. So how much you can bend it so that you don't have to use curved glasses to make it more expensive. This is the corridor in between, which is the maintenance. So the outside is a ventilated skin. So it reduces, it's fully ventilated, naturally ventilated. So it reduces the glass solar gains. And the inside is then sealed with this second layer. Okay, let's finish on the, let's say this is the thing that you see at the bottom that I was talking about, that taking the axis and then kind of disappears into the sky. So if you were to stand down there in the tower, this is what it would look like. So again, I think I've explained these, so I'll fast forward but you can see it here. I was very happy that we finished it after, I think it took 17 years, the project. Not because we couldn't design it, but because the client decided to fund it later. But obviously, for efficiency, all this, I'm not going to go into detail, but there's a relationship with the amount of core space versus the amount, and all that can be controlled. How do you cool? There were 3 kinds of cooling systems. I'm not going to go into detail much, but this is the final product, the lobbies, the interiors, the chiller systems, and the retail part of the project. But since then, we have gone on to design many, many, many towers and office spaces, and you know, all very different. And so is our office here in London. You can visit, it's down that road, which basically has a lot of things lying around in the showroom for inspiration. And you can go, and sometimes we do student works, sometimes there's someone cutting hair. So it could be anything. But it's just a place to people to get together and see things, and kind of we have now a workshop as well, so kind of experimenting. Okay, so next set of architecture. Let's come to the public realm from the private, or kind of semi-private. So this is a station we did in Riyadh. And let's go here. So that's the metro station. We won it in a competition. We were under a contractor. And the site was an afterthought. So the site was really tight. It was 2 blocks of land for buildings that they decided to put a metro station in. So we had this idea of lines, and then we kind of played around how to increase the volume inside, because there were 2 lines, the airport line and also the metro line, and they were on top of each other. And how do you make such a constrained space into something more volumetric? So the first thing we did is that we tried to integrate structure with axis. So the escalators and the structure follow the same rule. And therefore, you reduce the vertical structure, creating more volumetric openings inside the station, so it doesn't feel very claustrophobic, and floor slabs are only there where you can walk. Otherwise, it's just cut out. So you can see the 2 lines here. You know, in the bottom, you have the entrance. Then you have the first set of metro lines. Then you have a concourse level, and then you have a second set of airport line on top. Obviously, this is a picture, so you can see that you're in the middle level, and you can see the double height space, and then the light coming in through the top. So you don't, even though you're really close to the edge of the building. Obviously, this needs a lot of detailing again, a lot of iterations, a lot of panelization. Everything is listed. But this is what it comes to. From the left side is the render, and the right is the real picture. So and that's the entrance. So you can see that it has 3-story. We managed to carve out spaces. You can see very clearly how every little pocket that was not desired as a floor slab does not have it, so that you can increase the volumes of spaces so it doesn't feel claustrophobic. Okay, a quick glimpse into a larger public space, which is an airport in Daxian Airport in China. But I'll show this very quickly. It's a very efficient plan form. I'm not going to go into much detail, but it's a very efficient plan form that is one of the largest airports in the world. And maybe we can play a little bit of the video. Okay, there is music somewhere, but okay. But you can see how big it is, and also all these openings that you see in the middle is actually used to draw light right down through the airport. So all levels, departure, arrival, shopping, they all share natural light together. And that's the idea. I think I'm going to skip the video because I think I have pictures which will give you a better glimpse of the whole project. On the left is a serpentine pavilion we have done in Hyde Park, which uses a similar principle to bring light together with structural elements. So you bring the light together, and obviously serpentine is a smaller scale, and the airport, it goes through a larger scale. So if I'm at the arrival post or if I'm at the lower post, I still get a lot of natural light through into the airport, which usually doesn't happen in most airports. They use a lot of artificial light. Okay, a little bit different public space, which can be arenas, where people gather for a very short period of time, and then they leave. And then most of the time, the arena lies empty. This is a common phenomena through many, many centuries, from the Greek, Romans, this principle of gathering, people gathering for an event. So we won this competition in 22. I was leading this project. And of course, there's heritage nearby. So there's a heritage building. And they had a lot of culture of sports in Denmark, in Aarhus. And they wanted, and they have this church, and they had an access from the church to the stadium. There's like a ritualistic walk. And, they love their football. As you can see, it's a very big deal. Since we won it, we've always been in the newspaper locally every day. But why? So that's the stadium, let's say. That's the sea. It's stuck. Oh, no. But the bigger context here, so obviously there's a local context with a small heritage building in the front, but the bigger context here is the natural forest. The natural forest has really tall trees. And whenever we talk about context in architecture, more often than not, we relate to culture, buildings nearby, and so on, which is a very postmodernistic way of looking at architecture. But if you look at architecture as a larger context of the planet, you'd realize that it needs to fit in a larger context. And therefore, that's why we wanted to build that relationship. And therefore, we took this idea of this 54-meter tall trees, and then we kind of articulated it in a set of kind of columns. And the idea was that you have the forest on the left with a little bit of sprinkle of trees that tones down, and you have a forest of columns on the right. Okay. So these were the renderings of what we wanted to achieve. We won the competition. They loved it. One of the things that we tried to do here is be very tectonic, like not using too much cladding, right? Natural wood, pure concrete, or steel. Be very basic, but then add the articulations into, which we will show you how we do it, into these elements. So this is the concept I already explained. The left is a sketch initially from the design brief, which asked us to have this blob. And we took that and we shaped it so we have less footprint at the base. We could leave more open space. And then you can actually leave more gaps within the heritage. Obviously, there's lighting, and this is the flan atmosphere, and then a non-match day atmosphere. What would it look like? How would it happen what do people do in Denmark? They like to exercise. They like to run around, so they run around, cycling, anything, an event. So this is the concourse from the interior. A few areas of the interior, the players' tunnel, It's a very simple stadium. It has got a 60% closed facade on the top, 100% closed at the bottom to protect from the wind. It's an outdoor space, one single tier. So we obviously, some of you who know about stadiums, they know that we have a complicated geometry because of the rakers, because the rakers have to have a sight line that works onto the pitch and every corner. So you should be able to see it. And that drives majority of the stadium design. Simple things, whether the family sit, whether it's the crazy fans sit, and so on. So all that is taken into account. And obviously, we also have things like this, fire simulations. Funny story, we were halfway down into the after winning the competition, and they decided to cut fire timings by 4 minutes. So what was 12 minutes evacuation, we had to do it in 8 minutes. So obviously, we were all shaken up. But we had to look at every single detail, how we can manage it. But again, you have to get it done because this is what is necessary to make things safe. So it's all part of the architecture. The previous stadium that used to be there was then demolished to build what we have. So there's obviously pros of having a bigger roof and so on. We did wind, solar, also rain simulation for the first time for the stadium because they were really scared about the rain because the wind moves with the rain. So we had to kind of be very innovative in our office to do that for the first time. There were no softwares for this. And then obviously sound, acoustics, and what is the right shape of the roof for this kind of stadium. And that's the interior of the bowl. And in a concert mode as well. How do we do it? We have a geometry, we set parameters. Again, the same logic, same principles. Once we have designed it, we have a BIM model that has completely accurate. We have subcontractors who are also providing 3Ds, feeds back into our system, goes into the BIM model and a Deluxe system, consultants input, and then finally goes into construction. Things that we do for design is that you'll notice that the roof on 3 sides is the same depth, and on the 4th side in the north stand, which is the VIP stand, it's got larger depth. So how do we make it look the same? This is a challenge. So obviously the corners are very challenging because they're driven by the raker beams, which the people have to sit on, the number of seats. And they had to be aligned to the columns so that we don't have additional structure. So that was a big exercise, which now looks all smooth, but actually you can see that they are not exactly this. I mean, it's hard to see, but that's how it is. So south corners is easy because they're symmetrical depths. The north 2 corners are not. And what we try to do is that we try to make them typical so we could use only 2 molds for this entire 20-meter tall columns to be cast in one go. And this was our idea of transportation of it. And here you can see the mold, how we do it. And actually, this is a nice video. You can look into it. So this is the column being transported from the factory about 100 kilometers away, brought to the site with a big truck. And the guy is called Mike. There's only one guy who drives this. He brings he's going to bring over 100 columns in a span of a year and a half. And there are 2 cranes that lift it. So they have to work together. You can't lift 70-ton columns with one crane. So they put it in place. There are about 8 bolts that fit this column at the bottom. So it's fixed on 8 bolts and then poured in so it stands. These are temporary supports which were removed after the stadium is. So you can see now they are removed because the raker beams have come in. This is a picture from January this year. This is how its construction pictures. Yeah, it's moving fast, rain or snow. They're geared up. They had a lot of snow this year. And obviously, a little bit about the facade. We could have done a lot more with the facade if it wasn't for the wind. We could have made it more articulation and so on. We were all ready for it. But because of the wind, they wanted it to be 60% in all sides, most sides apart from the north side, which had the stadium. So some samples of the facade that we are currently investigating, glue lamp wood, coated to last longer. That's the goal. This is the status where we are as of last couple of weeks. But what does it teach us? The first stadium was built in '97, and we had to rebuild it again. So So what it really teaches us is, you know, construction, building technology, so on and so forth is okay. We are always progressing. But without a good aspiration, these buildings will be destroyed very quickly for another one. Because we are always trying to find that one that we want to keep with us. Why? Because our lifetime is very limited. You know, a stone is 5,000 years. We live about 100. So to say that the building is just for our personal use, for our personal functions, which are eventually going to change, it's also non-realistic. Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to read it, but the idea is not to repeat. That's what the conclusion of this is. So new aspirations, new designs actually make people want to visit it, make people want to be there, make people want to embrace it as part of their cultures. And that's very important for architecture. Corbusier said this many years ago in his book, and I thought it was very fit. He said the purpose of construction is to make things that hold us together, but the purpose of architecture is to move us. How are we doing with time, Amandine? Can I go on, or should I wrap it up? No? Go on? Okay. Anyone asleep? No? Okay. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, because we are in London, it makes a lot of sense to be here because there's a lot of energy. So what drives people to cities, right? It's a high energy state. It's an avenue to make money, right? The power is always focused in the city, you know, and you improve your social and career aspirations. So whatever we do. That's why we move to cities. And that's why we have built, you know, this is the 3,400-year-old city on the right. So, and so is, you know, you dig up any place and you find cities. You know, people were always looking to be together. Because together you grow, and together you, in olden times, you could fight the Neanderthals probably. But when I started doing my city research in 2008, UN Habitat had come out with a report saying that the cities will increase 30%, and 28 of them will be mega cities. This is already exceeded, okay? So when we look at cities, and London School of Economics, which I was part of at the time to do the research for Mumbai, had done a research from other cities to see the density distribution on the land. And more often than not, the density was unevenly distributed. And that is a concern that I found out, and I saw London, okay, I'll explain it briefly, but it used to be, at least, very unified density. It was a big city, but with very uniform density. Today it's changed. But that is because London was not designed. It emerged with Anglo-Saxon towns. And once they grew larger, they combined itself. The only city that was London was Londonium, where we are right now, where the wall is, and it was a 1 square mile city. So, you know, what drags? You know, the Ebenezer Howard wrote down the 3 magnets that, you know, what brings people to the city, what's profitable in the country. So there's 2 kind of movements in a city. One is the city drag movement. People leave everything and come here. And the other one is the suburban leap. So once they make some money, sometimes people want to go away from the city to live in a peaceful life. But, okay. Now, city designs, as you saw in New York, or the uneven equal distribution of density, is because the city designs changed in the 60s, where car came into our lives, and most of the city was designed for cars. So to have straight roads. Everything else was subsidiary to the car road, right? So that created an economically unbalanced model. So as soon as you drew the plan, you know where the profitable land was. And therefore, those pieces of land start to rise, right? Giving you the resultant of towers. Now, that is not the right logic, or if you go to medieval towns and all, it is very balanced. Most roads are equally as important as others. So the challenge was, you have, in the city, you have three kind of investment: high, medium, and low, right? Low being people, high being, governments, and then medium being small-term developers and so on. And currently, obviously there was Brasilia that was designed, Chandigarh that was designed by Corbusier in Brasilia, and Navi Mumbai by Charles. But these were the three big cities that were designed at the time that were influenced with the cloud-driven model. But today there is no design. Today we are repeating the same thing. However, we are working and operating on a chaos network system where each individual council in London can design and build and allow their FSI to grow differently. So there is no one planning this. Because we have never designed cities for over 2.5 million, which was the logic that Corbusier and Oscar Niemeyer and so on were working on. So how do we balance it? And that was one of my research. Obviously, in the office, we are doing large-scale projects, and we see this all the time, that this is happening. But what is the solution? So we have one solution that's in the market, which is the high-rise, high-density model. We have done projects with low-rise, high-density as well. Okay, and we were always investigating the parametric urbanism when I came to study in the UK 15, 20 years ago. So we were working on, can we drive large behaviors? Can we control? But I went back into nature to see that actually schooling of fishes and who have 1/10 the size of the brain that we do, or even less, manage to work together in large organisms, right? How do they do that? Can we modulate that? I'm not going to go into much detail on how we do it, but I'm just going to go into the basics of currently. It is very top-driven because 1% of the people invest in the city, and they are driving the city. And 99% of the people are the small investors, and they don't drive the design of the city. So my job was, can we firstly plan a city for over 10 million people, which is very common today? Secondly, can we make it viable for investors? Do we think that even 99% of the people can contribute to have their own, let's say, expression in a city? So obviously we did a lot of research, models, road networks, organic, planned, so on and so forth. And I went into a competition in China a few years ago, Li Shui Master Plan, where we use a mesh network system, which a lot of people have written about, polycenters, and also, let's say, Carlos Modena's 15-minute city, that you don't have to travel too far in the city to work, live, get into hospital, and so on. And can they all be combined to make a viable city? So that was the proposal of Li Shui. I don't know if this will work, but this works in a diffuse limited aggregation system where there's logics built into the system that then tracks what is there and what is yet to come, and then tries to grow nodes instead of roads. So the idea is not to plan roads, but to plan nodes. And if you do that, Space Syntax was my consultant, and they evaluated it was much more it had more successful nodes distributed all over than if you had a road-driven grid system city. So this was the software in progress. Obviously, we had a large site. It was 172 square kilometers. We had tools to control parameters of different items like commercial, housing, so on. Things that show you that the centers would rise in time. So you have multi-nodes that would then, somewhat similar to London, would evolve with time and merge together, and you wouldn't notice the difference. This last slide is the reality on the top, that real estate is seen as an investment rather than for people. So we are all fitting into a one-bedroom, two-bedroom house, that is given to us. We have no expression other than buying B&Q furnitures. So how can this be reverted? And I think one of the only things that could possibly do it if investment was diverted into something else. And I'm not arguing for crypto, but I'm just saying the city has to be free from this burden. And only then we will have good cities again. Obviously, it has issues with mining and sustainability. These are already the cities in the world as a dot that exists today. And this is one of the last slides where it says that the relationship with human and machines, which we are so much talking about today, that humans are incredibly inaccurate. Computers are accurate and fast, but they're also stupid. And humans are completely inaccurate, slow, but they're also brilliant. But together they make a very good force. And how we utilize this, is up to us. Some of the talks that you've heard today is on the right would be a book that I'm trying to finish. So apart from the city bit, most of the architecture will hopefully come out shortly if you're interested. Anyway, that is me. Thank you so much for listening all this time. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Any questions from the floor?
Yes?
Where do you see the future of architecture over the next 10 years, just say 10 years, in terms of where we are with AI, where we are with new construction methods, materials, thinking?
Might not sound very nice. The reality is that right now, architecture, or as I know of architecture, the composition of art, the composition of embodying our new domains, our new challenges, is starting to feel a lot of constraint. One is due to regulations. The market is over-regulated. Let's accept it. Using a design element is becoming more and more challenging because the suppliers and so on are trying to hit the regulations and cannot break it, because if you want to break it, you have to be a really rich person who can afford all the tests. So it looks like a sorry state, but I don't believe that it will be. And I think in the 70s and 80s, we had a little bit of a downtime after the modernism was dying out, and suddenly the deconstructivism came in, and it kind of blew apart the entire market and made people dream again. Whether it was right or wrong, but it was a level of experimentation that was revived. And I think because today we are moving so fast, I do believe that there will be another revival, at least in my lifetime, that we will be able to change the market again and look forward into the idea. And that's one of the reasons I'm writing the book, is that to help general people understand that architecture is not construction, and architecture is not functional, and architecture is not investment. These are the three things that we believe architecture is today, but it is not. And that once we understand it, I think we will be able to sort it out. And so where will it go? We don't know. If we knew it, then we'll be on it. But it is certainly not AI, I can tell you that.
But working in China, for example, is there less constraints over there versus over here?
No, constraints are increasing day-to-day basis. Even China, the constraints are increasing. The regulations are getting stricter. So I don't think anywhere in the world is going the other way. So it's a challenge, but I think design has a potential to absorb everything and yet do something better. And I think that is why we are where we are today. Like so much of the things that we have built, fantastic things, is because we always had a downtime and we revive. Yes?
I imagine you have, but are you aware of the Humanise campaign? Which is a heroic campaign. Sorry, that's a bad name to mention. But it's a really interesting campaign, actually. I think it links in really nicely with lots of stuff that you could say, which is about actually bringing it back to street level, and how, whilst obviously it's hard to impact whole cities, what we can do is impact how people feel at street level and how people connect to those buildings at street level. Are you seeing
You're talking urban scale, or are you talking architecture?
I guess a bit of both. So yeah, I mean, so architecture mainly. So it's basically about how if you create buildings that people feel passionate, connect with at ground level, at street level, then they'll want to look after them or they'll want to look after the space
Yeah.
more.
I think it has a lot to do with the scale of the streets. So if you look at London here, you can do it. You know, you can make an architecture that instead of having glass walls here and glass walls there, you can connect because the street scale is okay. But if you see the new cities, which are like flyovers and 60 meters apart, you can't have a street life because you can't look at the other person on the other side of the street in the eye. They are an anonymity. And that's what makes cities more dangerous as well. So the more crimes and so on because if you can look and see someone committing a crime on the other street, the person who's committing it will be more conscious of it. But if there is 20 flyovers flying across you, it doesn't work. So that's an argument. So street life makes things better. You know, the coal drops yard and so on. But again, you know, if you look at it, yes, it's built, designed the way the street life should be, but you don't see so many places spilling out in the coal drop yard because, you know, they're all these, you know, high-end companies that shut shop at 5 p.m. You're thinking about Italy, but it's UK. You know, the reality of weather, I think weather is a big factor in northern regions. So when I worked with Charles Correa, he was a very much a humanist kind of, you know, because he could do it because the weather is great. You know, 60, 70% time of the year, you want to sit outside in the evenings, right? So even if it's hot in the day, the evenings are pleasant. Can we do that in the UK? Perhaps not. Can we do that in Denmark? Even less, but only in certain times of the year. So how does the building behave when it's active and when it's not active in these times? So to say that street life will be permanent in all weather conditions is also a little bit unrealistic.
Yeah, I don't think that's quite what I said, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's why, you know, the architecture that's mostly in the west or in the northern hemispheres are blocks. But if you just move slightly down to south, Italy, Spain, it opens up. Semi-curved spaces, semi-open spaces become more common in these areas. So some of the architecture is driven by the climate. So yes, but I don't think, you know, a principle can be applied universally as a blanket. Yes, it is successful in certain areas, but may not be successful in others, if it makes sense. Any questions? Yep. Right. Thank you for listening.
I'd just like to extend our thanks again for that interesting talk. I didn't capture all of it, but the bits that I did capture were really interesting topics, and I'm sure these guys appreciate it as well. So thank you for your time. We appreciate it's valuable, and giving up your time to talk to everyone is really appreciated. So thanks again. I don't know whether there's any questions at the end. I'm sure you can filter a couple of questions.
Yeah, that's all right.
With the time restraints I like, but feel free and spend some time with us as well. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Your book. You mentioned your book. So is this?
It's not published yet. It's
okay.
in work in progress.
When do you think you'll be published then? Is this Manana? Is this something in?
Yeah, but the initial part goes in the book as well.
Yeah.